Well, first of all, I'm really delighted to see you and your pets here today as we celebrate the Feast of St. Francis Transferred. Normally, the Feast of St. Francis is on the 6th of October, and so this is the 9th, is it? The 8th? This is the 8th. 7th, whatever day it is. So, anyway, we're glad that you're here. We're glad that, for those of you who brought your animals, we're glad that you did. And we will be blessing them shortly. You know, I have worn glasses my whole life. Since I was in first grade. And, you know, at some point when I was a young adult, I decided that I wanted to get rid of them. And I wanted to maybe have contact lenses. And so I got contact lenses, and they were made out of plastic in those days. They weren't the soft ones. They were hard lenses. And my corneas are very flat, and so consequently they would slide down into my eye. And they made them so that they had a little rim around, a little lip, and that would catch, as I blinked, it would catch and pull them up. Needless to say, it irritated my eyes. Also, I discovered two things. One is I'm allergic to the plastic. And number two, that, you know, there's a lot of respiration that comes through your eyes, and if they're covered up, you feel it. And so I didn't care for them much. Later, when the soft lenses came out, I tried those too. I was allergic to the plastic, and I hated that feeling of this feeling. Well, if you've worn contacts, you know. So I wear glasses. But you know, sadly, as we age, we notice that various parts of our bodies and its functions changing, and mostly not for the better, I'm afraid to say. You know, for instance, it seems that the print in the hymnal is getting smaller and smaller and a little more faint, making it difficult for me to you know, see the words and the music and then keep my place as we move from one verse to the other, from one stanza to the next. And you know, I had my eyes examined several months ago, and I saw Dr. Whitten up in Charlotte Hall, and I was expecting that the strength of my lenses would change, but Dr. Whitten said, no, my prescription had not changed enough, or my vision had not changed enough to justify getting a new prescription. You know, sometimes when I wear these glasses, or my old ones, which I wear those more than these, it feels like I'm not wearing the right pair, especially with these, because they've got dark frames around the edges, and I can see the frames, and I'm not used to that. It's frustrating. But suffice it to say, I'll be getting my eyes examined again, probably in a few months. You know, those two disciples that we heard about in our gospel lesson this morning, they were on the road to Emmaus. And I think they didn't have the right pair of glasses to see the stranger who joined them and to recognize him. And I believe it wasn't completely their fault. You see, the gospel writer Luke tells us their eyes were kept from recognizing the one who was walking with them. Now, maybe the passive voice of the sentence points to a someone, God, who has blocked their power somehow of recognition, you know, their ability to see. But I suspect that there were other things that interfered with their vision that day. Maybe it was the shattering grief over having had a triumphal entry into Jerusalem, which had gone terribly wrong just a few days later. That could have been blinding. Or seeing their master brutally beaten and stripped naked and crucified on a cross, and the strange story of an empty tomb. That had to be disorienting and most likely traumatizing. The scattering of friends at a hasty exit out of Jerusalem could have, and going into hiding, could have been completely discombobulating. You know, a combination of all these things could have blinded even the most visionary of Jesus' followers. And so maybe we should give them a break for not recognizing their master on the road. that unfamiliar traveler who seemed to know so little about current events in Jerusalem, but was so gifted in opening the scriptures to them. And maybe we should allow them the catharsis of retelling what they had seen and experienced so traumatically. I mean, just speaking aloud the words of great anticipation and then of disappointment and of death might have provided some healing for them. I mean, after all, we ourselves have stood in need of opportunities to speak of our own pain, our own tragedies, our own heartaches, and our own losses, haven't we? And yet, there is something that for some could be irritating about their blindness. And since it's perfectly obvious to all the readers of Luke from the time those words were first written down that the stranger is Jesus, there's no doubt about that, why couldn't these two men recognize him as they were walking along that road? You know, they had the luxury of walking with him before he died. They had the advantage of hearing his voice and of seeing his face and touching him in a way that no reader of Luke since has ever had. But they couldn't see. They wouldn't see what was really happening in front of them. So what kind of glasses were they wearing that would keep them from seeing what it was as plain as day to all of us? Some of you may recall, maybe you've read or you've heard about, back in 2002, Mother Teresa's letters were published. And they gained a lot of notoriety as her doubts and her questions about God were brought to light. And many Christians have seen her struggle as evidence of the spiritual journey that so many saints have taken before her. You know, a journey into darkness, into a blindness of the heart that ultimately leads to the pure light of God. And they talk about the dark night of the soul. I know some of you have heard that term. Or a wilderness experience. And there are plenty of other metaphors for that perceived absence of God, so common among devout seekers of the Holy One. And there was also an atheist, I know you know his name, Christopher Hitchens. He died in 2011. He published an article in which he expressed his view as being quite different. Before he died, he wrote in Newsweek his own idea of Mother Teresa's doubts. He said, "It seems, therefore, that all the things that made Mother Teresa famous, the endless hard toil, the bitter austerity, the ostentatious religious orthodoxy, they were all only part of an effort to still the misery within. And the misery," claimed Hitchens, "was a result of her deep-seated doubt." And further, this fundamental disbelief found expression in what Hitchens described as her extreme doctrinal excesses. You know, what kind of glasses was he wearing to make such charges? And who of all of Mother Teresa's interpreters is wearing the right pair now? You know, those of us who live less heroic lives than that of Mother Teresa also cannot find the right pair of glasses for recognizing our encounter with mystery. And that's one of the things that draws us to worship. That's one of the things that draws us into community, is this whole concept of mystery. You know, we talk on our cell phones often as we're driving on busy highways. Hopefully that all of you present, along with me, do that with hands-free Bluetooth devices. Many don't. I see people on their phones up to their ears all the time. And think about this for a minute. So you're driving along, you're distracted. And at some point while driving around, you may have found yourself changing lanes and not noticing the car next to you that's slightly behind in your blind spot. Now, thankfully, you swerved back into your lane just in time before there was a crash. Did something divine intervene,
Give me a flower.
or were you just lucky?
No, I'm a girl.
Or let's say we
They're
lose
pebbles.
sight of our 5-year-old child or grandchild in a sudden crowd, maybe like this one. And just at the right moment, you happen to look to your left and you see her trotting off towards the riverbank there. You know, did an angel direct your attention in that direction? Or was it just a coincidence? Or maybe you've experienced a family member who recovers from a long illness in a way that her doctors just can't explain. Is it a miracle or the natural, albeit not yet discovered, healing of her body? I know that our beloved Florence Whitten, now of blessed memory, believed that her healing was a miracle. When after having been so sick with cancer, she seemed to be healed and then went on to live a full and productive life for more than a year after she had been in the hospital the first time for a very extended time. And most of us thought we would lose her much sooner. We listened to our friends' reports of feeling, really feeling the presence of God in some difficult situation. And we wonder why we can't feel such a presence or know such a comfort when we're hurting. Is there a pair of glasses that will help us recognize what God is doing in our lives and when God is doing nothing? Is there just such a pair of glasses that each one of us, no matter who we are, can put on and see God right there in front of our faces? Maybe not. Maybe not. Some of you may have read the book A Secret Life of Bees. And in that story, Sue Monk Kidd describes a character, August Boatwright. And August is a strong African-American woman who gives the 14-year-old white girl named Lily shelter after Lily runs away from home. And she tells Lily that her grandmother once heard out in a barn on Christmas Eve a whole hive of bees singing the Christmas story that you see or read in the 2nd chapter of Luke. And when Lily asks if it really happened, if bees really hummed gospel truth, August could only reply, well, yes and no. And then she goes on to say, what I mean is that the bees weren't really singing the words from Luke, but still, if you have the right kind of ears, you can listen to a hive of bees and hear the Christmas story somewhere inside yourself. I love that image. It's a mystery, isn't it? You can hear the silent things on the other side of the everyday world that nobody else can. And of course, the point for August is that some people can hear, and some people, whether they try or not, simply cannot hear. Or to say the same thing in terms that we're using today, some people, no matter what glasses they have, will never be able to see, it seems.
Oh my God!
But thanks be to God, that's not what Luke thinks, as he tells the story of the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus and their encounter with the risen Christ. And of course, Luke leaves lots of room for God's action in this story and every story that he tells about Jesus. He said their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And then he says, then their eyes were open and they recognized him. These sentences, with their passive allusion to someone acting off stage, signal that God's power to open eyes cannot be controlled or manipulated by human efforts. God shows us what God wills. And our job is to pay close attention and to notice what's happening in our lives and around us.
Down.
And it's in noticing, church, that
Oh my
is the good
God.
news about how we all have eyes to see after all. That's God's truth. And for the disciples finally recognized Jesus in the most ordinary of moments. Things like sharing a meal that echoed all the other meals that they'd shared with him, including the one we call the Last Supper. And although Jesus vanishes in the moment of recognition, just as so often in our own lives, the touch of God seems so light, so soft. In that stillness, we experience a fleeting presence. That same fleeting presence that the two disciples continue to sense his presence as they recover that burning heart feeling in what had been happening all afternoon. Sharing a journey with the risen Lord that echoed all the other journeys that they had taken with him, including the last one to the cross. In a church, long walks in which the things of the heart are discussed, meals eaten in the company of good friends, coming together as a community of faith week after week, day after day, to share, to worship God, to offer our gifts of bread and wine, to bless and break that bread, and to share the cup. Faithfully paying close attention to the symbols and what they mean held up for us to see and taste each week. These are the lenses, glasses through which God can be seen. Glimpses of the Holy One in broken bread, in broken moments of our lives. These are the ways that the glasses we need to see are shaped and fitted to our eyes, and more importantly, to our hearts. Church, our job is to simply put those glasses on, to pay attention, to notice, and to gather as the church, and to name what God is doing then and now and forevermore. And then, after being fed with the spiritual food of the body and blood of Jesus Christ, now physically part of us, because we've taken through the bread and the wine, consecrated and blessed. We've taken that in. Jesus is very much a real part of us. We are fed by that spiritual food, and then we go out from this holy place to proclaim the good news of Christ and to serve. And that, dear church, is why it's so important for each and every one of us to be here every Sunday. You know, it's not about what you get out of it. That's part of it. But it's what you bring to it. It takes all of us to create the vitality of our worship to make it as rich and as meaningful as it can be. So I urge you, as you think about this, think about the importance of being the community gathered. And also think about the importance of reaching out to others and bringing them with you into the fellowship. I invite your response.